The night everything changed when that final buzzer echoed through the arena, sealing a brutal 184 defeat. Something shifted permanently in the world of women's basketball. This wasn't a forgettable regular season loss that gets filed away and forgotten by morning. This was a full-scale collapse broadcast to millions of viewers, and it ripped open every hidden wound inside an Indiana Fever franchise that had been quietly bleeding for months. The scoreboard told one story. The chaos unfolding behind the scenes told a far darker one. The moment the game ended, the Indiana Fever organization descended into crisis mode. Behind closed doors, the mood was volcanic. According to multiple insiders, the team president was beside herself with rage, storming through the executive suites and confronting anyone unfortunate enough to cross her path. The image of giving up 100 points on a nationally televised stage wasn't just embarrassing. It was catastrophic for a franchise carrying the weight of the biggest marketing moment in WNBA history. For months leading up to this night, Indiana's front office had been carefully managing expectations. They smiled at press conferences, spoke calmly about player development, and reminded everyone that building a championship culture takes time. Rookie growing pains were normal. Losses happened. Patience was the word repeated over and over like a mantra. But patience has a breaking point, and this game shattered it completely. The defensive breakdowns were the kind that make experienced basketball minds physically wince. Open transition layups, blown rotations, defensive assignments that looked like they were being figured out in real time rather than executed from a practice system. The offensive game plan fared no better, sets that looked disconnected, decisions that seemed improvised, and a second half where the coaching staff appeared completely unable to halt the bleeding. Insiders reported that the yelling from the executive suites was so intense, people in the corridors could hear every word. That is not a normal post-game environment. That is a franchise reaching its absolute limit. The financial reality made the pressure even more suffocating. Indiana didn't just draft a talented basketball player when they selected Caitlin Clark. They drafted an economic earthquake. Sold-out arenas, record television ratings, and a media spotlight so intense it magnified every mistake to a national audience. Sponsors were watching. Network executives were watching. The league office was watching. When a team carrying that level of commercial significance gets outclassed by 16 points and looks organizationally disjointed doing it, the consequences extend far beyond the box score. Every poor defensive rotation becomes a brand liability. Every botched timeout becomes a conversation in a boardroom somewhere. The Fever's leadership understood this reality clearly, and what they witnessed that night told them one undeniable truth. The current structure was simply not built to operate under this magnitude of pressure. While the executives raged upstairs, the scene in the locker room painted an equally troubling picture. The body language throughout the second half had already been telling. Veterans on the bench wore visible frustration, their expressions reflecting the exhaustion of players who felt lost within a system that wasn't giving them clear answers. Timeout huddles were described by those present as chaotic and emotionally flat, precisely the opposite of what a team down double digits needs to mount any kind of comeback. When players stop responding to coaching in those critical moments, it signals something much deeper than a bad game plan. It signals a broken relationship. Reports surfaced that several players felt disconnected from the offensive scheme, unclear on their defensive assignments, and generally unsupported by the staff during the moments that mattered most. Professional athletes are wired to compete at the highest level, but they need structure, clarity, and above all, belief in the leadership guiding them. When that belief erodes, performance follows right behind it. The post-game locker room reportedly reflected that erosion perfectly. Not the passionate, heated silence of a team furious at themselves after a tough loss. Instead, witnesses described something colder, a hollow, resigned quiet where nobody spoke, nobody made eye contact, and nobody seemed surprised by what had just happened. That kind of silence is more alarming than any argument. It means the players had already emotionally accepted that something fundamental was broken, and they were simply waiting for the front office to catch up to what they already knew. Some of them reportedly were quietly relieved that changes appeared inevitable. The Fever's leadership didn't waste time processing their emotions before shifting into action. The evaluations began almost immediately following the final whistle. The front office brought back Kelly Crosskopf, a seasoned and respected executive with a track record of building winning programs and absolutely zero tolerance for organizational dysfunction. Her return alone sent a clear message throughout the league. Indiana was done explaining away poor results and ready to start demanding excellence. Crosskopf and the team's leadership conducted a swift and unflinching review of the coaching staff. This is one of the harsher realities of professional sports that fans sometimes struggle to fully absorb. Coaches can be hardworking, dedicated, and fundamentally decent people, and still find themselves on the wrong side of an organizational decision when the results don't align with the stakes involved. The head coach, who had been holding things together through a turbulent stretch, suddenly found herself in an impossible position, defending her methods to a front office that had already decided the methods needed to change. The decision to pursue a complete coaching overhaul wasn't made carelessly, but it was made quickly. Indiana needed someone who didn't need time to establish credibility or earn respect, someone who walked through the door already commanding both. Finding that kind of coach mid-season, when most quality candidates are employed, is the kind of challenge that separates aggressive organizations from passive ones. Indiana was about to demonstrate very clearly which category they fell into. Here is where the story becomes genuinely fascinating for anyone following WNBA updates closely, because while Indiana was imploding, the opposing sideline was simultaneously dealing with its own form of turbulence. Stephanie White coached a masterclass that evening. Her team dissected Indiana's defensive scheme with surgical precision, executed their transition offense relentlessly, and made the Fever look fundamentally unprepared at every turn. By every measurable standard, it was one of her finest performances as a head coach, the kind of game that reminds the entire league why she is considered among the sharpest basketball minds in the women's game. And yet within hours of that victory, she found herself under siege. The reasons ran deeper than one game. For weeks, rumors had been building around White's dissatisfaction with the Connecticut Sun organization. The concerns were substantive, allegedly inadequate investment in practice facilities, repeated resistance to her requests for roster improvements, and a contract situation that remained frustratingly unresolved despite her consistent success. When a coach of her caliber operates in an environment where the front office isn't matching her ambition or her vision, resentment is a natural consequence. Passion requires fuel, and her fuel supply was reportedly running dangerously low. Fans in Connecticut began noticing the shift. The fire was still present in her coaching decisions, but the overall energy felt different, wearier, more guarded. And when the Indiana rumors began gaining traction, the Connecticut fanbase's anxiety curdled into anger. Supporters who had celebrated her brilliance turned on her almost overnight, convinced that their coach had mentally checked out long before any formal announcement. The 184 victory suddenly carried a deeply ironic undertone. White had just spent 40 minutes exposing every weakness in the Indiana Fever's system, and in doing so, had essentially produced a live audition tape for the very job that was reportedly being discussed in back-channel conversations across the league. She had demonstrated, in the most public and convincing way imaginable, exactly why Indiana needed her. That detail was not lost on anyone paying attention. In the days that followed, the drama consumed the entire WNBA ecosystem. Media coverage was relentless. Reporters stationed themselves outside practice facilities and pressed White at every available press conference, firing questions about her future, her loyalty to Connecticut, and her thoughts on the Indiana vacancy. She handled every inquiry with practiced professionalism, deflecting cleanly and offering nothing that could be taken out of context. But in a media environment, this charged, even composure becomes evidence. Every pause was analyzed. Every carefully chosen word was dissected on social media within minutes. The Fever president was allegedly working her network with absolute urgency, leveraging every professional relationship and organizational resource to ensure Indiana landed their primary target before a rival could complicate the pursuit. The league office monitored the situation carefully, mindful of tampering regulations, while simultaneously aware that informal communication between organizations is simply an accepted reality of how roster and staff decisions get made at this level. Free agents slowed their own decision-making, waiting to understand how the coaching landscape would settle before committing to organizations that might look completely different in 2 weeks. Rival coaching staffs felt the anxiety ripple through their own locker rooms. Analysts spent hours modeling out the downstream effects of what one catastrophic game had set in motion. Everything was on hold, waiting for the resolution of a situation that had been triggered by 40 minutes of basketball. The 184 game will be remembered long after the individual statistics fade from memory. Not because of what happened on the court, blowouts occur in every season, but because of what it exposed and what it accelerated. It confirmed that operating in the Caitlin Clark era demands a fundamentally different standard of organizational excellence. The margin for error has effectively disappeared. The casual viewers who tune in to watch Clark play are not necessarily loyal fans who extend patience through rough patches. They are spectators drawn by the spectacle, and if the spectacle is a disorganized loss, many of them move on. That commercial reality puts enormous pressure on every decision the Fever make, from roster construction down to in-game adjustments. It also revealed that coaching talent is the league's most urgently contested resource. When a franchise as prominent as Indiana identifies the person they believe can elevate their program, they will pursue that person aggressively regardless of the complications involved. Stephanie White's situation, brilliant, underappreciated, contractually vulnerable, made her the most visible example of a coach whose value wasn't being matched by her environment. Indiana saw that vulnerability and moved. For White herself, the situation represented the most difficult crossroads of her professional career. Caught between a fanbase that felt betrayed and an organization that felt blindsided, while simultaneously being courted by a franchise offering the resources and the spotlight she had been denied. The decision carried consequences no matter which direction she chose. And for anyone watching WNBA updates closely, this entire episode serves as a masterclass in how quickly circumstances can shift in professional sports. One night, one game, one scoreboard reading 184, and the entire landscape of women's basketball was permanently altered. Loyalty is complicated when institutions don't match the ambitions of the people carrying them. Patience is a strategy that works right up until the moment it doesn't. And in an era where the WNBA is experiencing its greatest growth and most intense scrutiny simultaneously, the organizations that understand that reality will build dynasties, while the ones that don't will keep watching their foundation crack under the pressure. The Indiana Fever chose to act. The consequences of that choice are still unfolding. Stay locked into WNBA updates as this story continues to develop. What do you think? Does a coach deserve criticism for pursuing a better opportunity, or is that simply the nature of the business? Let us know in the comments, and make sure you subscribe to WNBA updates so you never miss a story.